This is a very special day as I celebrate broadcast number 700. It's been, 13 years plus. The podcast started in summer of 2010. And, I've done different things over these milestones to mark the occasion. For this, I wanted to talk to a friend, a buddy of mine and fellow activist. He is host of the Genetically Modified Skeptic channel. His name is Drew McCoy. Thanks for coming, Drew. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. You've been doing this 13 years. I'm just over 13 years old now. And so,
dude, you and I on camera, the YouTube link is in the description box, but it's like old guard meets the next generation. Like I have some people who are like, oh, great. It's like a father-son event when they see us on screen together. And I'm having a moment about that. But you and I sort of bump elbows on the road, but we don't get a lot of chance to speak, just hang out. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted you to come, is just so we can have a conversation, being sort of on the front lines of atheist activism. For those who do not know who you are, let's get a quick introduction. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, so I'm Drew, host of Genetically Modified Skeptic on YouTube. I've been around doing atheist type stuff since 2017, and I make a whole variety of videos on my channel about, debunking pseudoscience, alternative medicine stuff, to talking about early Christian literature. I have scholars that come on my channel to discuss a lot of issues related to religion and cognitive science of religion, that kind of thing. A whole variety, of things related to atheism and skepticism, kind of like Seth. You don't just stick to just one thing. You got to have a little grab bag of content, so you have something that interests just about everybody.
Now you bring something up. I had somebody on the Al Jazeera English feature that you and I were both part of. They came to our homes and interviewed us for this 9-minute piece on YouTube, atheism, and I want to talk about that. There was somebody in the comments, and they were like, once monetization became mandatory for the dissemination of YouTube videos, these frontline activists, they're all doing the same stuff. There's nothing new under the sun. No new arguments. Why bother? And of course, I was like, well, hang on. So I went back. Maybe I'm just being defensive, but I was just looking at my recent channel because you were talking about variety. Christian nationalism, we did ghost hunters, purity culture, Old Testament slavery, Robert Ingersoll, Islam, secular students, molecular biology, vaccines, interfaith alliances, suicide, the Sound of Freedom film, the Gothard cult, AI, cognitive liberty, Ron DeSantis, book bans. I swear to God, it was, if you'll pardon the expression, I'm like, what more do you want? We're all doing our best out here. And it sounds like you're trying as well. You don't just log on every day and say, this is why the book of Genesis has been debunked, which is really old hat these days. Is that correct, sir?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. Atheism, skepticism, critical thinking in general, if that's your kind of core of your content creation, of your interests, there's so many things that touches. I get comments on videos that have nothing to do with whether or not God exists saying, dude, when are you going to stop just saying God isn't real over and over for years? This is getting boring. And that's when I know the person has not actually watched the video. They're commenting based on a stereotype, which, some people are going to do that. You gotta break that mold with time.
Well, I host a site and show called The Thinking Atheist, which is an icon representing the rejection of faith. I came out of a faith culture. So did you. And we'll talk about that. And so I was afraid to give myself permission to reason, right? Trust not in your own understanding. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. Who am I to know the mind of the Lord? And so I was trained to distrust reason and not to rely on thinking. And so the Thinking Atheist was really more of a reminder we should all engage. And one of the apologist things I see is a drive-by in the comments, thinking atheist, that's an oxymoron, and then they all take off, And most of the time, a lot of people who are hammering all cap stuff into the channel, you can tell that they aren't really watching or listening. They are sort of forming an opinion based on what they think the channel might be. And that's the case for you, right?
Yeah, definitely. That happens, and I actually released a video just the other day that was talking about the idea of being a nice atheist, and I have a brand similar to yours in that I'm I'm not this kind of raging type guy. That's not my personality. I don't know if I have the charming gift of the gab that you have, Seth, but
Stop. Stop.
people do think that I'm nice generally in person, and so that works well for me. But then I have people that say that, oh no, Drew, it's just a facade. You're actually very cruel because you're willing to criticize, people promoting gay conversion therapy, which is nonsense and very harmful. So if you say that you're nice but you do that, you're a hypocrite. Or they say, oh, you're way too nice. And you never actually have any teeth to your content. You never criticize, which, again, if you take a deeper look into what I'm doing, I think that can be shown to be pretty untrue. There's substance there, but you'll get the drive-by hate comments no matter what you do, honestly.
I think a lot of people too, they think kindness is weakness, and I just don't buy that. Or if you're not extreme, then you're singing Kumbaya with your ideological opponents. There is no middle ground, and I see this sometimes with the punch a Nazi crowd. Seth, do you support punching Nazis in the street? And I'm like, no. Oh, well, you're empowering the Nazis. It's just one of those things where there's no other form of protest or resistance or a method for activism or even changing minds. They've just given up. The only thing to do is to destroy these people. And I think they must be defeated, or certainly the ideology. But if you're not an extreme person in that way, they think you're weak. And that's hard. I'm the Mr. Rogers of the movement, right? I mean, you probably heard that kind of thing, Drew. You and I
I've literally gotten that exact comment. Yes,
you have
that comment. Yes.
You're an ex-evangelical. How long were you a Christian?
I left Christianity when I was about 22. So I beat you to it when it comes to age, at least.
Yeah, everybody else. Yeah. Well, what flavor of Christianity? Paint the picture.
Yeah, I was in the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, so rather conservative. I will say, though, that my family was considered somewhat distastefully liberal within the context of the specific church because my sister wore pants. And I don't mean pants in church. I mean pants, just pants. And we were allowed to listen to secular music. So yeah, very, very conservative, being gay is an abomination, young earth, 6-day creationism, that whole fun circus. And so, when you leave that kind of high control group, it affects every relationship in your entire life. It affects the way that you carry yourself day to day. When people sometimes comment and say, well, Drew, you're so nice, that I actually think that maybe you are regressing to fundamentalism. I want to say, first of all, if you think that being nice and fundamentalism are one and the same, you're in for a rude awakening if you ever get into rural Alabama.
Now, when you say IFB, though, I'm thinking about these wacky extremist guys that Hemet Mehta's always posting on social media, right? They're calling for the death of gay. They want the execution of gay people. Am I thinking, is this the same thing you came out of?
Yeah, oh God, almost. I mean, so that's the new Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, and I was a part of the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, so the old guard. The way that I differentiate the two is I say that the new IFB says slurs in public, and the IFB says slurs in private. Wow. So we would never have a sermon that was up there talking about execution of anyone. But back in the back room, if you were to discuss something with the pastor and you caught him being particularly candid, then sure, he might say that, well, being gay is an abomination and it absolutely is bringing hurricanes and tornadoes and other natural disasters into our country and poverty and all those things. So maybe the best thing to do would be to round them up. The new IFB is just very brazen about that.
The Al Jazeera piece was really focused on YouTube activists and how the game has changed since the quote unquote new atheists of 2007, 2008. I entered the game in 2009, and my stuff was a lot harder edged back then. But over time, I began to soften. I started to relax a little bit. I think some of the anger that I felt from the damage done by my religious culture started to wane a little bit. But I also realized that, getting into shouting matches and freaking out at people on Twitter and mocking other people for believing produced no positive result. Like, I never changed a mind with that. I don't know, Drew, did you ever have a moment where you came out and you were just pissed off and that anger sort of tempered or fed into your work, your content?
In a way, yes. I never was the type of person who was raising my voice at all. I made some jokes at people's expense for sure, but I think that the way that my anger and just kind of healing or yet to be healed wounds affected my activism and my content was just, I used to consider myself an anti-theist. I thought that kind of the ultimate goal for me was getting us closer to a world where religion didn't exist. And I thought that that was a realistic goal, and that was, the highest goal that I could attain. That was kind of the best good that I could fight for. And now I've realized that, yeah, religion can do a lot of harm. It still actively does a lot of harm. And I have no qualms about anybody trying to fight against religious harm, whether they are a religious person or they're an atheist, whatever. But I think that it was somewhat my latent Christianity, actually, that was influencing me to be kind of an anti-theist. What that meant for me was that I had figured out the best way to be a moral person and to influence society to be moral and productive. And so that meant everyone kind of needed to do what I'm doing. After a while, when my wounds healed a bit more, I kind of realized, oh, that's like Christianity. There's only one path to God. There's only one way to do the right thing, and I have it, and everyone else needs to act like me. It was several years into doing content until I figured out that I don't think that was me anymore. Probably beginning of 2020 is when I started thinking, no, I wouldn't call myself an anti-theist, but just someone who's trying to fight religious harm.
The Al Jazeera piece had a couple of things that the host said that I disagreed with. First of all, it called Christian nationalism a fringe movement. I'm like, holy shit, it is not fringe. Secondly, it talked about the atheist worldview. And I hear this sometimes from religious people. Well, you have an atheist worldview. And I'm like, atheism is not a worldview, damn it. Humanism is, but atheism is not. You agree, disagree?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I feel like gets me in trouble or people have a hard time with me. I agree with I think the sentiment that you're expressing that no, atheism is a singular position. It doesn't entail all of these other beliefs like humanism. That said, if you call yourself an atheist in an American context, in the context that we're in, I think maybe especially in the American South, Tulsa or Austin, that people are going to think, hey, that means that you are some sort of secular humanist. Either that or they think that you're a Satan worshiper. If they don't think you're a Satan worshiper, then they think that you're a secular humanist. And usually they're right. Now, I am someone who does not philosophically, align with what atheism has been defined as in those kind of rigorous intellectual terms. I don't make any sort of claim that there's no God. I don't even necessarily know that I defend the lack theism kind of idea. Like, well, I'm not claiming that there is no God. I just am not convinced that there is. My position is that I just don't think that it's knowable, and I don't think it's particularly useful to speculate about it. But I call myself an atheist, and even an atheist more so than like a humanist, because when people hear the word atheist, they know what I'm saying more often. They know where I'm at, what I'm getting at, the people that I have things in common with. So no, atheism isn't a worldview, but it is an identity, at least where we are. And so I think that's the overlap there, with the way that we speak and the way that Ryan, the journalist, speaks.
Well, here's where I'm coming from. The aliens told me there is no God. That person's an atheist, but it doesn't mean they're a rationalist. I don't believe in God and everything sucks and I hate humanity. those types of things. Or I'm not. I've met flat Earth atheists. I've met anti-vax atheists. I've met people who cross the political line one way or the other. Run the spectrum as atheists, and so they don't believe in a God, but it didn't mandate anything else about them. But I understand your point that it's sort of the first step toward, we would hope, toward humanism. I mean, am I hearing you correctly? Like, if you don't believe there is a God to solve our problems, then we're going to have to solve our own. Is that accurate?
I mean, I wish. No, I think that my main point is just that, I think about this in sociological terms, is that when people hear atheists, they have a certain thing in mind, and usually that is a broad category or broad identity that, like, I do have most things in common with. I do have most things in common personally with the popular conception of atheists, at least if that conception of atheists is not entirely based on horrible stereotypes, But I do see what you're saying. There is definitely utility in saying, I'm an atheist, but that's just one part. There's way, way more. And I think that you and I actually might be coming from the same place ultimately, in that, yeah, I find myself as an atheist because it's kind of easy. But if I'm having a longer conversation with someone, me getting out here and being like, I'm an atheist, and really sticking by, I don't care that much about that. I'd rather be the thinking part and the thinking atheist rather than the atheist part, right? I feel like that's more what you're about too.
You and I have a lot in common in that we were sort of both Mr. Clean in our youth, right? I mean, I was like student leader. My parents did not drink. We got in trouble for humming a beer jingle once, where me and my sisters and I, of course, you play hear them on television. We were in the car and it was like, if you've got the time, one beer stands clear. We were just singing it, which is what jingles do. They're supposed to brand into your mind. And my mother had a fit, lost her mind, like, oh my God, don't you ever utter those words again. And there was this sort of culture of prohibition, right? A whole bunch of don'ts. Was that true for you?
Oh, yeah. Actually, it's funny that you bring that up, because when I was about 17, I went to a Rangers baseball game with one of my friends from the youth group and with her parents. And, I thought I was a good influence and all that kind of thing. But I did get in trouble because at the game, there was a guy walking around, like, selling beer. And I thought it was really fun that he would go to each section in the bleachers and have a little contest, basically saying ice cold beer, yelling ice cold beer. And everyone was supposed to stand up and yell it. And whatever section yelled it the loudest, got bragging rights, whatever. And I thought that was a fun thing. I, at one point, stood up with the rest of the crowd and yelled ice cold beer, even though, of course, I would never drink a beer. and that was the moment that my friend's parents decided that I was a bad egg. So, yeah.
It's just for those on the outside looking in, they must think, how did you not see how abnormal or bizarre or controlling this is? But when it's everywhere and everybody else is doing it, the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s was also part of, my formative years, late 70s, 80s and 90s, where everything was imbued with the devil. We thought KISS stood for Knights in Satan's Service, the rock band. Gene Simmons was out there spitting blood with his big tongue. And we thought, well, that's the devil's tongue, and so whatever it was. I mean, everything was satanic. The music was satanic. The cartoons were satanic. The toys were satanic. We just saw the devil everywhere. We were kind of a terrified culture. Did you have any of that in your background?
Oh, my God. Yeah. So I was a young kid when Pokemon started to get really, really popular. And my mom saw the little cartoons and the little characters and thought they were really cute, which they were. I was like a 5-year-old boy. So, of course, I loved Pokemon. I knew a bunch of Pokemon names and things like that. And one day, my mom wanted to sit me down and have a very serious conversation. And she leads me to the living room. And my dad is sitting there. And, I'm only 5. I was like, it's about to go down. because dad's there. He's going to talk to me about this too. And that's when I first heard the term Oriental demons, which apparently they heard from some preacher. I think that they did a look into Pokemon from some of their friends, and they found some VHS tape or DVD that had this sermon on it that was saying that Pokemon, because it's based somewhat in Japanese, Shinto beliefs and have parodies of different spirits and things like that. That means obviously that Pokemon is a ploy by Satan using the people of Japan to inscript or enlist children into, Satan's service. Yeah. So I was not allowed to have any of my little Pikachu toys anymore because Pikachu was actually in some sort of Japanese electricity demon.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
And I became horrified of Pokemon for a little while because of that, as you can imagine.
Well, I think there's a Pokemon character that actually evolves in the game. And I know that was a point of contention for some pastors. They're brainwashing children by having their creatures evolve. One of the things I heard, and it was one of the complaints about contemporary Christian music, back when Christian rock started to become a thing where we would copy what was going on in the pop culture. We'd have a Christian version of it. But a lot of hardcore pastors still condemned it as satanic. They said that the drums emulated the drums of Africa that were used in ritual to summon demons. I see you nodding your head. Does that?
Yes.
I mean, you heard that one.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. I not only heard that one, I was from not my immediate family, but my extended family. These were the guys, the missionaries that went to places where indigenous people lived and still celebrated, in traditional ways, that saw that and came back to the States to tell all of the naive white folks in the 1940s and 50s that they're summoning demons out here, and rock and roll was invented by Black people. And so that's, obviously there's a through line there. And so rock and roll is really just a ploy to enlist people into Satan's service. It's all connected. So
it's not even covert racism. There's some overt racism attached to that as well.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. Yeah. You posted a series of videos on your channel about the quacks. Define quack and tell me why you did the series.
But in that series, I just mean a quack is someone who, I guess maybe we would call a grifter nowadays. Someone who is using pseudoscience or kind of just dishonest argumentation or ideas in order to shore up political or monetary or any other kind of support or power. And I did that series because I just thought, in having conversations with my own family members and friends, I've confronted ideas like naturalness bias, the idea that because something's natural, it's automatically better. And it never really occurred to me that was a particularly difficult thing to see through or debunk. But for a lot of people, they just hear that around them. It's very normal. They see these authority figures, these quacks using arguments like that to sell their nonsense miracle supplement. And they buy into it. So I just thought I'm going to make a series. At first, it wasn't supposed to be a series, but I really liked making those videos where I just talk about some of the basics of maybe media literacy was a part of it, or just critical thinking skills, knowing some terminology that's very useful and seeing through some of the trickery, some of the grifting that people get into online, in person, in literature, whatever.
Well, that's where I was going. There are specific tactics that you lay out that they use that you say we should be really watching for. Can you think of any specifics, examples?
Yeah. I mean, a big one is that it's a huge one today, honestly. People will make some sort of statement and it's very outlandish. Think of a Jordan Peterson type. And there's a lot of kind of like big manly men types on social media now that do this. They make these very outlandish, grandiose claims. And then when someone says, hey, I have some questions about that. Can you back that up? They kind of just retreat to, well, I'm just asking questions. Well, what I'm saying is not rigorously understood, and I'm not saying that you should accept it as fact. I'm just saying that you should buy my book where I talk about it. And they retreat back to this position of, I'm just asking questions. And so they're asking questions all over everyone. And this is a form of what we call Mott and Bailey. It's kind of like an informal fallacy. It's where someone puts forward a claim that is kind of easily attacked, and they lead with that. But then when that claim is attacked, they retreat to a position that is actually very easy to defend and harder to attack. So it's difficult to point out the logical fallacy or nefarious purposes that the person has if they're just asking questions, right? But ultimately, what we have to remember is that if we're seeing people that are just like spewing all of these ridiculous claims that they're not trying to back up, and that's what they're doing until, and they stand by it until they are asked to back it up, and then they retreat to, I'm just asking questions, bro. Got to realize that, like, no, they're not just asking questions, and if they are asking questions, they're doing so in a way which is obviously, whether it's purposeful or not, obviously deceptive and spreading misinformation. So we should be able to call someone out on something like that.
I get a lot of Joe bros who come by my channel because I go hard at Joe Rogan, a guy who I'd like to like. I'd like to like Joe Rogan, but every time I turn around, he's got some crank in the interview chair, and he gives them a platform to spew the worst, most batshit crazy, destructive, just totally unsubstantiated stuff. And then when somebody pushes back, he does that very thing. Well, I'm just asking. I'm just a guy. I'm not a scientist. I'm just saying, don't you want to have the discussion? Aren't you the least bit curious? The fact that you're not asking questions tells me that you're the closed-minded one. And of course, when he does this, I'm screaming. I'm screaming at the video feed. I don't know. You got any thoughts on Rogan? I don't want to, I'm not trying to increase your amount of hate mail, but what do you think?
Yeah, I did a response video to an interview that Joe Rogan did recently. And it was with this guy named Dr. Stephen Meyer. I'm being nice and using his title there, Stephen Meyer. Yeah. But he works for the Discovery Institute, which is it's an apologetics factory masquerading as some kind of scientific research institution, which it's not. They don't actually publish in rigorous journals. Creationism doesn't have anything to say scientifically. It's just religious. Yeah. But yeah, I did a response to this alongside my friend John Perry, who makes science education videos about biology. And sure, Joe Rogan pushed back a little bit, said that, hey man, you're saying that you believe in Jesus because there were sightings that were reported hundreds or thousands of years ago, but there were sightings of Bigfoot, so is that really particularly good evidence for that? And yeah, they have a bit of a back and forth, but ultimately what I'm seeing is when it's not super simple, when it's not extremely easy for Joe Rogan to push back kind of for the sake of comedy more than anything, he just sits there and lets the guests spew whatever they're spewing. So you have Joe Rogan being like, hey man, why don't you believe in evolution? And then Stephen Meyer has a very long explanation about why he thinks that certain theories within genetics are not rigorous and they don't make sense because of this and this and this, and math gets involved and it gets very complicated. And so Joe Rogan sits there being like, whoa, man, fascinating, because he has no idea what the guy's saying. And the audience doesn't know what he's saying either. He just sounds smart. And I think that that's kind of the danger of the just asking questions man thing, because when you entertain any idea because it's just fun and you think that that's what being open-minded looks like, you're going to let in a lot of nonsense that you just don't have the skills to understand are different than other, forms of information. A lot of Christians just don't have the skills or understanding of science to realize that someone like Dr. Stephen Meyer is not a publishing accomplished scientist. He's a guy that writes popular apologetics books about biology.
I am talking here with Drew McCoy. He is host of the channel Genetically Modified Skeptic. Is that a nickname for you as well, or just the channel? Do they know you as, GMS?
I would say that more so than the thinking atheist. The host of Genetically Modified Skeptic is known as the Genetically Modified Skeptic a bit more. The meaning behind that is it's layered, but I think the one that's most important to me is that I am the first in 4 generations of men in my family not to be a Christian missionary, and I mean on the mission field, living in small villages with the people who were still worshiping their ancestors and, of course, the demonic. And so for me, what genetically modified mean is it's a fun internet speak type way of saying that I guess that being a missionary is in my blood, but there was something that changed enough to make me not so much that. I hate when people turn it around and say, oh, well, you're a missionary for atheism. I have to clarify, no, I'm not trying to make converts, especially going out to rural villages where people don't necessarily have education to try to make people atheists. I would never do that. But I do feel like there is enough difference from my grandparents, my father, my great grandfather, that everyone there, to say that I'm doing something different. But there's a bit of a through line, obviously. I don't know. They were good preachers. I like to think that I'm okay at speaking.
You're not really a missionary. I mean, I think you and I have an activist nature. I mean, didn't you always? I would assume by watching your work that you've always kind of wanted to be an agent of positive change. I want to make a difference. I want to go out and engage. You find people who are passive in this world and people who are active. And so, I don't see you as an atheist preacher, but I see you as somebody who is engaged. You have an activist temperament. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a flattering way of saying it, at least. I would like to think that, yeah.
But if you were not an atheist, you would be in the jungle right now. And you would be bringing in probably food and medicine and games for the kids, and you would be
Oh no, Seth. Oh no.
Because that's normally what we did. We would go in and give them all the goodies, and then once we had sort of plied them with our wares, then there would be sermonizing. So
sure, but give us this day our daily bread is not referring to bread. Let's just say that I would be very good at speaking indigenous languages and translating Bibles into their version of the KJV. Wow. That would be my main skill set. Sure, I would give them my hand-me-downs and some food and things like that, but that would not be the focus.
No, all right. We came from it. Like, I didn't do overseas. Well, actually, twice I did take an overseas missions trip. And we would do that. We would go and meet their physical needs first, which I appreciate. They needed food and they needed clothing and resources, and we were raising money for a school, etc. But once we had met their physical needs, then we felt it was our mandate to meet their spiritual needs, which was really an arrogance of bringing in my own theology and saying, you're wrong, you're living wrong, you're doing it wrong, let me fix you. I mean, missionary work really is pretty arrogant.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I do have to say that, with my great grandfather, it was very much like, no, just preach to them. They don't need anything else. In fact, their poverty might even help them come to Christ faster. Wow. And with my grandfather, it was like, all right, we should love people in our communities generally. And we should make sure that they're provided for. But we're going and preaching to them regardless of where they're at. And then kind of maybe after the fact, taking care of them just because we care about them, which is better. And then my dad was a lot more concerned. My dad's not a preacher. My dad was the guy that was more like, I'm going to go work in a Christian run orphanage or kind of homeless shelter in a rural area and do that. And so I do see that there are grades to this. And I'd like to think that it got better with every generation. I think my dad is not that kind of archetype of the missionary who goes out and Mother Teresa's all over the place. Your poverty is really a blessing. So be poor, but also love Jesus. So yeah, there are grades of selfishness and superiority complexes that missionaries have, but at the end of the day, I consider it all colonialism.
Well, we always felt like nobody's the villain in their own story, and we always felt like we were doing the right thing. But our sincerity didn't mean that we weren't really presumptuous and kind of stupid. Like they didn't need to be fixed. How about Dad's perspective on you now? I mean, does he log on to your channel? Hey, that's my boy. Is that getting sticky?
I do have to say, and I try to keep it pretty brief when it comes to discussions of my parents, just out of respect. But sure. I have to say that one of the reasons why I do my channel is not because, like doing this makes my parents so happy. I wouldn't say that it does, but my parents will still have a relationship with me and still say, I love you unconditionally. And, my dad is the epitome of the meek that will inherit the earth, I like to say. And so, yeah, he'll watch my videos sometimes. And while it's not really his thing, it doesn't reflect his perspective. I think that as time has gone on and they've seen that the tone that I take is as it is, they've developed some pride in that I'm doing something at least in the style that they would like. Maybe it's not the message they would like, but I'm not one of these guys out here shitting on anyone who disagrees with me or believes what they believe either. So I do this because there are people who are just not in that situation, especially coming from an IFB background. I'm lucky to have parents that, while it's not their favorite that I do this, they still talk to me and still love me.
Coming out of Christianity, you did a piece about purity culture where you talked about conservative Christianity grooming you. What do you mean?
Yeah. So one part of that video was really just kind of deconstructing and examining this term that people are throwing around, this real hot button idea and buzzword that we've got right now of grooming, like this person, that person, this whole group, whoever that I don't like is a groomer. They are shaping children's minds through unethical means in order to prey on them, manipulate them, get some kind of perverted satisfaction out of them, something like that. And, I see the main group that is really being demonized with this whole buzzword of being a groomer are just LGBT people. I think especially trans people and parents of trans people. I even have people that subscribe to my channel or did that think that, yeah, if you show or expose a child to the fact that there are people who are LGBT out there and that they're not harming anyone, their life is fine, they're literally just like anyone else, that is actually trying to shape their minds in order to make them gay or trans or whatever. And there are all kinds of reasons why people would want to do this, which I've never seen personally, but they tell me that this happens. But really, I think if you look at this whole concept of grooming, of shaping children's minds deliberately to make them this cookie cutter that you like and that you can control for the rest of their lives, we really talking about LGBT communities? I mean, if we want to talk about the superlative here, we want to talk about the type of culture or the force or group within our American culture that does this the most, we're definitely talking about conservative Christians. I mean,
it's funny. When I was growing up, it was always, you can grow up to be anything you want to be. And then they just spent the whole of their resources limiting my options. Well, don't go to that church. And don't date that person, and don't read that book, and don't watch those movies, and don't have this opinion. Don't vote this way. It was really restrictive, and it was all sort of packaged with a bow that said freedom on it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that I could tell a whole story that you could relate to about me not being able to play a Pokemon video game on my Game Boy. That shows something, that there's truth to the idea that this is very pervasive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the way that I'll just talk about LGBT people in particular with the way that I was brought up. When I was exposed to LGBT people growing up, first of all, it was not until my parents were very, very sure that I was going to listen to them and that I wasn't going to be open-minded about this. I wasn't going to question them, and that they could stoke some kind of fear in me, right? So I was older, not a young child. And I get exposed to the fact that gay people exist. Back then I was taught, they choose to be gay, but the fact that people choose to be gay, I guess. And the way that gay people were painted were not as normal human beings that are diverse like any other group of people, but that gay culture means that you go out to the club a lot, you do a lot of hard drugs, you have a lot of extremely dangerous promiscuous sex, that you hate all religion, that you are purposely running away from the truth, that you're a nihilist, that your mental health is horrible. And so I was really conditioned, not just by my immediate family at all, but by my entire culture. Everyone in my church, in my school, extended family, my entire culture, all would present gay people as not just people, but as representatives of this entire community and group who were disgusting and unhealthy for reasons that if anybody, really did do this, one might think, oh, that's not desirable. And so when I get older and I'm running into, not at my Christian college, but out in the world, just running into like coworkers and things that are LGBT, I'm like, why do you seem okay? Like, why do you seem fine? Why do you have a steady job? Why don't you have a drug addiction? Why is your partner happy? Why are you happy? All of these things. And you just see that these narratives that you're taught from childhood are meant to condition you to be controlled by the group, by your parents. And that is, if we want to use the stupid buzzword of grooming, that's grooming.
All right, let's end with a deep thought. Let's get philosophical. I had somebody ask me recently, Seth, do you think things are going to improve? When you look around, especially at this country, do you think things are eventually going to get better? And I wanted to say yes, Drew. I wanted to say something encouraging. We just need to stick it out. The rising seculars in this country and blah, blah, blah. But, I'm in Oklahoma. You still live in Texas? Are you still down south of me here?
I'm in the island of Austin, floating in the sea of Texas. Right. Yes.
So you know what? So we've got Gilead going on in both of our states. We've got idiots getting elected and then reelected. We've got anti-vaxxers. We got flat earthers, QAnoners, deep fake videos that confuse the hell out of everybody. That's going to get worse. You got fake headlines coming out of Gaza, right? Complete with doctored photographs. So we don't even know what the correct news is, especially on social media. The Epic Times, I just read that they had increased their distribution by 600 or almost 700%. This is a propaganda paper published by a cult. Almost 2/3 of Republicans say they want Trump to run again in 2024. You got anti-science influencers that are pitching everything from healing crystals to drinking your own pee. I mean, you got AI replacing human beings. Jesus Christ. I want to answer that things are going to improve, Drew, but I find myself sometimes really discouraged. Tell me your perspective, man.
All right. Good news and bad news here. I think that the bad news is that these kinds of delusions, paranoid delusions, conspiracies, bits of propaganda, these types of things have always existed. And I think that I'm a sociology type guy. I like that stuff. So this idea that I've really taken to is something a lot of sociologists prop up, that when there's a lot of change, especially rapid change in a society, whether it's technological, cultural, whatever, people kind of start grasping their, reaching for their horoscopes and crystals, as Carl Sagan said. And I think we've seen a lot of, especially technological change happen even just in my lifetime. And so people have always done this, and they're going to continue to do this. That's the bad news. I think the good news is that eventually people get used to something. They get used to things, people get used to the internet being around. People get used to America not being as white as it used to be or as Christian as it used to be. And so a lot of these paranoid delusions just don't have the same fuel of the kind of momentary reactionary paranoia. Of course, people will move on to other things. There will be conspiracies and all this nonsense in the future. But the ones that we have right now, the epic times, they're going to fail someday. And we can at least sit by and think, you know what? Hopefully that's within my lifetime, and I'll get my popcorn ready.
I've been saying that about Fox News, and they are still right on the front, right at the top, making a shit ton of money. And I am waiting. I'm waiting for the time when the Jenga house falls, crashes to the ground. But it is hard to remain optimistic, especially knowing that the internet, which is such an amazing resource, is also it really encourages information silos. So if I do have a terrible idea, I can instantly find validation. I can find misinformation that validates whatever I want to believe. And then a community of like-minded people that validates me even further. And then I don't leave and I throw stones at everybody else. I'm not one of those guys who hates technology. I actually think it's amazing. But of course, when we see the good, we also have to acknowledge the dark side. I don't know. The internet is a wonderful thing. The internet is a terrible thing, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. You can use any tool for good or bad purposes. And every tool will be used for both. Every technology that's ever been invented has been used to destroy and to build up. I have to say that I am happy that I'm going to get sappy here.
Go ahead,
Seth. As someone who really values a certain online community of like-minded people that are not in the majority, I'm really glad that there are some people, yourself especially included, that have been here for a minute doing this consistently, not giving in to just the grift, the clickbait. I'm sure that you could blow up in a second if you decided to, pad your pockets with some bullshit product or buy into some kind of alien conspiracy or something like that, because people like that stuff. It's sexy, but you haven't done it. And for me personally, as someone who started after you did, that gives me a lot of hope. And I hope that I can be that. I can be somebody else's Seth, and they will do a much better job than I could ever hope to do in the future.
Yeah,
right?
that's terrifying. Me as a role model is just a terrifying thing, Drew. I'm just saying. Yeah, I think the one thing that I'm most proud of is that this community remains focused on the prize. We remain focused on the work. I'm going to direct everybody to go and subscribe, Genetically Modified Skeptic. What's being worked on right now? Like if I send everybody over there, what are they going to see next?
Yeah, so depending on when you put this out, I either a video coming up or a video that's very recent about basically ideas that ancient Christians had about sex. Did you know that there were early Christian church fathers who, the verse that talks about if a piece of your body causes you to sin, you should cut it off?
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain part of the body that made a lot of men sin. And apparently there were some very influential Christian men that really possibly did cut it off. In fact, the Council of Nicaea had to outlaw that practice.
So I was always like, if thy right eye offend me, cut it out. But I wasn't ever thinking about,
let's be real, Seth. How many times has your right eye made you sin versus something else?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if I'm out looking and lusting or something, I mean, that sin can be visual, but I hadn't really thought about, an amputation below the waist. And now I'm tremendously horrified. So now I'm going to have to go watch the video when it comes out. I will make sure everybody has a link to your channel in the description box. I appreciate the conversation. It's nice to finally hang out and talk like real people. I'm sure we'll bump into each other on the road out there. And if there's anything we can do to support your work, just let us know. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Seth. It's been a pleasure.